where do we begin and who do we begin with? Let's do, first of all, the bombing in Iran, which killed at least 84 people. There was a whodunit thing out there. Who might have put this bomb at the memorial service, which, you know, basically America said, not us. Israel said, not going to say much on this. IS have said, it is us. I'm going to start with you, Mike. IS, you think it's definitely IS? You think there's another subtext to this? What's going on? Should we be worried?
Well, thanks, Alex, for having me. And it's always great when you talk geopolitics, because I think you carry one of the clearest messages we see over in the UK. And so I'm always happy to be on your show. I think this is a very complicated issue, of course. Now, the execution or the terrorist attack on those individual civilians that were around the Soleimani gravesite certainly are innocent victims in this. This type of attack is not condoned by Israel or the United States, or even the Iranian resistance groups that have been supporting us for years against the mullahs of Iran. More than likely, this was a Sunni terrorist organization, and more than likely it was ISIS-affiliated groups, and I believe they've actually taken credit for this attack. But again, this is part of a tactic around a widespread issue where the Iranian proxy networks are carrying out the wishes of Iran, backed by Russia and China. And I know we'll get into that.
Yeah, we're definitely going to be getting into that, Philip. But I know we were sort of having a chit-chat about this, about who might be responsible for this. And we were sort of throwing a few names into the mix because essentially we've got an extremely fragile situation over in the Middle East, a fragile situation where the pot has been very vigorously stirred by Iran, who seem to have scuttled off stage left a little bit and, you know, pulled themselves out of the fight. And at one point it seemed that this bomb attack in the heart of Iran could be a sort of enticement to bring them back in and inflame this war even more. Do you think that might have been part of the motivation to create even more instability, or is this essentially just one lot of Muslims who don't like another lot of Muslims?
Well, it's distinctly possible. We have to remember that there was an awful lot of unrest going on and attacks going on in the Middle East between Iranian-backed militias and other groupings across the whole of the Middle East before the horrific attack by Hamas into Israel on October the 7th. So that hasn't gone away. That's a foundation on which everything else is being built on. And Iran is not a homogenous country. There's an awful lot of dissent going on inside Iran and different groupings between the religious leading government and the political leading government, and those that are supporting elements of that and those that are supporting none of it. So the tactics against those that were going to commemorate Soleimani's killing by the US in Iraq it is not something that would fit into anything that the Western agencies or even the Israelis would get involved in, and does fit very well with the sort of thing that ISIS would do. And they're opportunists. They've seen an opportunity to come in and stir the pot whilst the pot is being stirred in a bigger way elsewhere. And I think they've taken that opportunity. There are factions in Iran who want Iran to be more open and explicit in the attacks that are being carried out across the whole of the Middle East, whether it be by the Houthis, backed by Iran, by other Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria, stirring everything up. And Iran is quite happy to use plausibly deniable outlets, but not be overt in what it's doing at the moment. Some Iranians wanted to be overt.
Now, Mike, let's move on now to these Houthi attacks on cargo ships in the Red Sea, because I remember you telling me a number of years ago, actually, because we've often spoken about China and what they might be up to with the Belt and Road Initiative, and especially when it comes to just chucking a bit of money into helping to build a dry port here and there, and then going, oh, you didn't pay back your bill, might take that over. And then, of course, looking at some of the naval exercises that have taken place in recent years, and between whom, whether that be Russia, China and Iran, or then, oh, South Africa's suddenly joining in the game, are they? I remember you saying to me a long time ago, well, look, the plan at foot, essentially, is for some pretty malign powers and anti-Western axis to control maritime routes, because 80% of food and fuel and whatever it may be requires getting on a boat and getting to where it needs to be. Talk to me about that and the sort of the danger of the situation we're in right now.
Well, it's extremely dangerous, and I think all these things are related to each other, but at its core, what you're seeing is Iran and its proxy networks being emboldened for these types of attacks, and they would only be emboldened if they had the backing of China and Russia and the other authoritarian powers, which really seek to create chaos and destabilize the region. Unfortunately, U.S. policy of deterrence has really eroded, and now we have this policy of capitulation. We saw this in Afghanistan. We saw it obviously in Ukraine, where our concern, our paralysis in these efforts is really one of concern about escalation, when in fact our weakness creates the escalation that we're seeing. I mean, the Red Sea as a major source of commerce has all but been shut down. And we even have 2 U.S. carrier strike groups in the region, but the attacks continue on our forces. So I'm very worried when the Secretary of State, who's made his 4th trip over to the Middle East in the last 4 months, is going over with a message of de-escalation, humanitarian aid, and supporting the peaceful end to this conflict, when in fact, that will not stop the conflict. The Iranians and their proxy networks are totally emboldened right now, and I am sure that this will continue to escalate. I was happy to see that the U.S. is, at least in some case, returning fire on these Houthis that are attacking shipping in the Red Sea. And you've also seen recently some of the high-value targets, both with Hezbollah and Hamas, being taken out. That in and of itself will not de-escalate this problem. We have to go at its core, and the core is the Iranians, and the Iranians want us focused on the proxy networks when in fact this is coming clearly from Iran.
Yeah, I mean, sticking on that, Philip, we've seen in recent years as well a flurry of big sort of state visits and meetings, glad-handing between the sort of world leaders who we don't really get along with and trust, whether it be Russia and the Iranians, Russia and China. As I mentioned earlier, South Africa sometimes dipping their toe in. How much, when you see certain things start to unfold, whether it be the Belt and Road Initiative and some of the land grabs China's doing and some of their activities in the South China Sea, whether it be Russia through the invasion of Ukraine, starting to restrict grain coming out of that part of the world. 70%, I think, of a lot of the world's grain comes from there. Whether you now see what's going on in the Red Sea with the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels, how much of this is all connected and how much of this is down to these countries acting in harmony, or if they're just all pretty dodgy opportunists?
It would be too easy to be a conspiracy theorist and say, of course, it's all connected and everything else. So breaking it down a little bit, I've been at this game for 40-odd years, looking at geopolitics and the influence from a military perspective or from a commentator's perspective. I've never seen clear paths linking elements together in so many ways, and there are indicators that are in there. You know, a former intelligence officer, we work in indicators mornings. The indicators mornings that I'm seeing are Chinese weaponry turning up inside Iran, the Russians wanting the international oil price to go through the roof because that's how they help to fund what they're doing. Russia having trade deals with China to get oil and natural resources and everything else there, and you have to question what they're getting back from it. North Korean weapons turning up inside Iran, and North Korean weapons turning up with Hamas, therefore Iranian-backed groups that are around the place. North Korean weapons then getting into Russia. We're starting to see elements that are joining the dots up that me, from an intelligence perspective, will suddenly sit up and go, ah, right, I'm interested. We're beginning to see a pattern here. And that pattern, if you look at it, are from nations that can plan in multi-generational terms. They can think 20 years ahead and take tiny little steps as they move towards those, whereas we have to think in prime ministerial or presidential election terms, or more likely what tomorrow morning's headline is going to be, and who's done what to whom. And then we look at the global trade and freedom of navigation, and we're seeing China has been putting a lot of pressure onto the South China Seas, in particular around the Spratly and Paracel Islands, and you're trying to bully international trade traffic that's going through there and exercise control over it. And then we've got what's going on inside the Red Sea. 15% of all container traffic goes through the Red Sea up to the Suez Canal. We've seen since the Houthi attacks have gone in, and there's been about 20 different attacks in recent months. Since those attacks have gone in, they've been really quite sophisticated, but 20% of the global container traffic and maritime traffic has stopped going through the Red Sea and is now going round the South Africa. That's adding another 10 days to 2 weeks and millions of dollars onto the prices that it is to get our goods into the different countries around the world. There is a global impact. Iran is looking at what's going on regionally with how it can influence that from a global perspective. There are other players that are looking at it from a much wider global perspective and using the elements. This is a 3 to 4D chess game that's being played, if not more complicated than that.
Yeah, and it seems to me, Mike, that it's a chess game that currently is on steroids, because you've seen a massive expansion of BRICS, you've got OPEC Plus on manoeuvres. It seems to me that where once people could accuse the West of doing what we're seeing now being carried out by people with alliances who are, say, anti-Western, that we've always controlled, whether it's the movement of money across international boundaries. We've always had the whip hand when it comes to being the peacekeepers of the world, you know, and being the richest countries in the world, and had a dominance that other countries say, well, look, that time is up, essentially. But how worried are you at how quickly things are accelerating, and what do you foresee happening over the coming years and decades?
Well, I think I'm quite concerned that in the 21st century, what's happening with China and Russia at the helm is an indication to the rest of the world that democracies don't work in the 21st century, that authoritarian nations, in some cases with communist principles, want to have the veil of being a democracy or operate under capitalist principles or free market enterprise, when in fact they are state-owned enterprises. And what we don't understand is our own erosion of our forward presence, our deterrent model, our engagement on the world stage is what's at hand here. And our politics at home reflect our presence abroad. And right now, if you look at America, you look at the UK, there's so much infighting in our own governments. That is really what's emboldened the Chinese and the Russians to move. And then this fear of escalation on the world stage is something, every time we retract, they move forward. Every time we actually move forward, they retract. Every single time we push Putin or we push the Iranians, they do exactly the opposite. They actually retrench. Iran does not want to be brought into a direct conflict with America. We need to understand that. But the more weakness we show on the world stage, allowing the Houthis to control commerce, for example, is exactly the kind of thing. And if we allow that to happen, then they will take the next step. And so your point earlier about the campaign of unrestricted warfare by the Chinese and the chaotic situation that they have created, that we have allowed to occur, really going back to the days of the Iran nuclear deal, when we handed Iran the right to enrich uranium, that set into motion a policy of the Middle East by which we capitulated to the Iranians with money, with resources. And what we're seeing happen right now is an aggressive movement led by President Xi to create the kind of chaos that he wants us to be dealing with. And I do believe this is a test of whether or not we have the deterrent model or the will to protect Taiwan. And I would say right now, if I was a betting person, Xi is looking at the invasion of Taiwan through the lens of our weakness on the world stage right now.